I lost trust in people. I lost my dignity and my pride. I lost the person who I was supposed to be. I lost my sanity.
I just want to say I'm very happy that it's all over. It's been a long time waiting for this. It really happened with the prosecution team. They've really done a great job. So it's just like a weight's been lifted off. I don't know what else to say. It's a great day today. I think it'll make a difference in our lives of a family.
Imagine waking up as a 3-year-old girl in a hospital bed and no one in your family is coming to see you ever again. That's not the start of a nightmare. That's the true story of a little girl named Vanessa Bennett, and what happened to her family on one quiet January night in a small suburb outside Denver, Colorado, would go unanswered for 38 years. 38 years. Let that sink in. Because somewhere out there, for nearly 4 decades, the person responsible for one of the most heartbreaking crimes in Colorado history was walking free, eating dinner, watching the news, maybe even hearing about this very case and saying nothing. But before we get to him, before we get to the twist that finally cracked this case wide open, we need to go back to a house, a new house, a family who had just started to build a life together. And in less than 48 hours, that life would be gone. This is the story of the Bennett family murders. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel breaks down the darkest true crime cases in America, the ones that stayed buried for decades until science, obsession, or sheer luck cracked them wide open. You do not want to miss where this story goes. Subscribe now, because what happens in the next 20 minutes will stay with you. Let's rewind to January of 1984. Bruce Bennett was 27 years old. His wife, Debra, was 26. They had 2 little girls, Melissa, who was just 2 days away from turning 8, and Vanessa, only 3 years old. By all accounts, they were an ordinary young family, the kind you'd see at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, or waving from the front porch as the school bus rolled by. They had just moved into a new home in Aurora, Colorado. Barely a month or 2 settled in. Boxes probably still stacked somewhere. That new house smell still lingering. The kind of fresh start most young families dream about. But here's something small, something that, in hindsight, feels almost unbearable to know. That night, the garage door was left open. It's such a tiny detail. The kind of thing that happens in a million households, every single night, without consequence. A door left unlocked. A window left cracked. Nothing ever comes of it, until, one day, for one family, it does. Because someone was out there that night. Someone who had already taken a life once that month. And he was about to do it again. 6 days earlier, in the nearby town of Lakewood, a woman named Patricia Smith had been brutally attacked in her own home. She didn't survive. The weapon used against her was something so ordinary, so common in nearly every garage in America, that no one could have imagined it would become the signature of a killer. A hammer. Police didn't know it yet. They had no way of connecting the dots. There was no warning. No pattern anyone could see coming. Just a woman, gone, and a community left with questions no one could answer. And then, 6 days later, he came back. This time, for the Bennett family. On the night of January 15th, while the Bennetts slept, someone entered their home through that open garage door. What happened next is almost too painful to describe in detail, and we won't dwell on the specifics longer than we have to, because this family deserves to be remembered for who they were, not just for the horror that was done to them. But here is what we know. Bruce and Debra were attacked in their beds. Melissa, sweet, 8 years and 2 days Melissa, was also murdered, and in a detail that still haunts investigators to this day, she was assaulted before she died. And then there was Vanessa, 3 years old, fast asleep in the room next door. She was struck too, repeatedly. Her small body left with injuries so severe that doctors would later have to place a metal plate in her skull just to hold her forehead together. She would lose feeling on the entire left side of her body, forever. She would carry the physical scars of that night for the rest of her life. But somehow, impossibly, she survived. A 3-year-old girl, alone in a house with her murdered family, survived a night that took everyone she loved. Nobody came for them the next morning. No one raised the alarm right away. The Bennetts didn't show up for work. Their phone rang and rang with no answer. It was Bruce's own mother, his mother, Constance, who eventually grew worried enough to check on them herself. Try to imagine that moment. Driving over. Maybe rehearsing in your head what you'll say when they open the door, laughing about how you worried over nothing. Walking up to that same house that still smelled like new paint and fresh starts. And instead, finding something no parent, no grandparent, should ever have to find. Her son. Her daughter-in-law. Her eldest granddaughter. Gone. And in the room next door, somehow, someway, a badly injured 3-year-old girl. Still breathing. Still alive. There's a detail from this case that still makes investigators pause, even decades later. When police finally arrived and Constance made the emergency call, she couldn't even tell them the address. Not because she didn't know her own son's home, but because the family had moved in so recently, she had genuinely never needed to say it out loud before. Imagine that. A grandmother, in the middle of the worst moment of her life, fumbling to remember an address, because the family had barely had time to live there at all. That's the moment their story became public. That's the moment Aurora, Colorado, would never be the same. But it's also the moment when a decades-long mystery began. Because the man responsible simply vanished. No name, no face, no leads. Just a hammer, a broken family, and a silence that would last 38 years. And what happens next, how they finally caught him, what almost let him slip away for good, and the woman who grew up in the shadow of this tragedy and somehow, impossibly, found her voice, that's a story you are not ready for. Stay with me. For years, this case sat cold. Not because detectives didn't care. Not because they didn't try. But because in 1984, the tools we take for granted today, DNA testing, genetic databases, digital forensics, simply didn't exist. What they had were fingerprints, footprints, witness statements, and a community terrified that whoever did this could still be out there. And they were right to be afraid. Because the Bennett family wasn't the only target. Just weeks before their deaths, another woman in Aurora had been brutally beaten and assaulted in her own home. She survived, but she was left with injuries, and with a story eerily similar to what would happen to the Bennetts. Add that to Patricia Smith's murder in Lakewood, just days before the Bennett family was attacked, and a horrifying pattern started to emerge. A killer, moving from house to house. Striking in the dead of night. Using whatever ordinary object was within reach, a hammer, most often, to carry out unthinkable violence. The press began calling him exactly what he was. The Hammer Killer. And then, nothing. No more attacks. No more bodies. No more leads. He was gone. As if he'd simply stepped off the face of the earth. Here's where most true crime stories would tell you the trail went cold and stayed cold. But this one has a twist that even seasoned investigators still shake their heads about. Because the Hammer Killer didn't disappear. He just moved on. Literally. Later that same year, in August of 1984, hundreds of miles away in Nevada, a man broke into the home of a young couple and attacked them in a chillingly similar fashion. But this time, for the first time, he didn't get away with it. He was caught. arrested, charged, and eventually sentenced to 110 years in prison for the attack. Think about that for a second. The same year he allegedly took the lives of the Bennett family, he was already behind bars for a different, almost identical crime. He would spend the next several decades of his life locked away, not for what he did in Colorado, but for what he did just months later in another state entirely. And for over 3 decades, nobody knew the connection. He served his time, year after year, decade after decade. While in Colorado, a mother, a father, and a little girl lay in graves with no name attached to their killer. While a 3-year-old survivor grew up not knowing who took her family from her, or why. This is the part of the story that should make your stomach turn. Because justice was sitting in a prison cell in Nevada the entire time. And nobody knew it. So how did they finally find him? Science. By the 2010s, DNA technology had advanced light years beyond what investigators had access to back in 1984. Evidence that had been carefully preserved from the Bennett crime scene, evidence collected by detectives who likely never imagined they'd still be waiting on answers 30 years later, could now be tested in ways that were once pure science fiction. In 2018, investigators ran that old evidence through updated forensic technology, and they got a match. The DNA from the Bennett family crime scene connected directly to a man already sitting behind bars. A man named Alex Christopher Ewing. Can you imagine being the detective who got that call? After decades of dead ends, after case files gathering dust in storage, after a community slowly starting to forget, a single notification appears. A match. A name. A face. The very man responsible had been serving time in a Nevada prison this entire time, for a crime eerily similar to the one he was never charged with in Colorado. But here's the twist that makes this story even more infuriating. Investigators didn't just find one connection. They found 2. Because that same DNA also linked Ewing to the murder of Patricia Smith, the woman killed in Lakewood just days before the Bennett family. The same hammer. The same MO, the same monster, 1 man, 1 weapon, 2 crime scenes, 4 lives lost, and 1 little girl left to survive it all. For 34 years, he had a name nobody knew, a face nobody could place, a cell number, but no headline. And somewhere in Arizona, a grown woman, the same little girl who once lay injured in that house, the only survivor of that unthinkable night, was living her life, carrying scars both visible and invisible, having no idea that the man responsible for destroying her family had just been identified. She didn't get a phone call that day. She didn't get closure in an instant. What she got was the beginning of a fight that would take years to finish. Because being identified is one thing. Being convicted, in a court of law, decades after the fact, with witnesses aging, evidence weathered by time, and a defendant who had every legal right to challenge every single piece of it. That's an entirely different battle. And that battle was only just beginning. By 2021, 37 years after that January night, Alex Christopher Ewing finally stood trial for what he did to the Bennett family. Picture the weight of that courtroom. Picture jurors listening to a 911 call recorded decades earlier, the voice of a grandmother, panicked, disoriented, unable to even remember her own son's address because the family had only just moved in. Picture prosecutors laying out evidence collected from a crime scene most of them weren't even alive to witness firsthand. And picture, somewhere in that courtroom, a woman who was once a 3-year-old girl left for dead, now sitting, watching, waiting for the verdict that had taken her entire lifetime to arrive. On August 6, 2021, the jury reached its decision. Guilty. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened next, inside that courtroom, and inside the heart of the woman who survived it all, is where this story stops being about a killer, and starts being about her. Stay with me. Because what Vanessa Bennett has lived through since that verdict will break your heart, and somehow, still manage to inspire you. Guilty. 1 word. 37 years in the making. But for Vanessa Bennett, that word didn't erase what had already happened to her life. Because here's something most people never stop to consider about survivors of horrific crimes. The verdict isn't the end of their story. It's barely even a chapter. The real story is everything that happened in between. And Vanessa's story, the one she has bravely chosen to share publicly, is one of the most heartbreaking journeys of survival you will ever hear. Let's go back. Back to that hospital room. Back to a 3-year-old girl waking up, alone. Vanessa has no memory of the attack itself. Not the sounds, not the fear, not the moment her entire world was taken from her. In some strange, small mercy, her mind never let her carry that specific horror. The only thing she remembers from that house, the only fragment left, is the pink insulation she once saw in the walls. That's it. That's all that remains from the home she was supposed to grow up in. But her body remembered what her mind couldn't. She was left with paralysis on the left side of her body. To this day, she cannot fully feel whether she's gripping something tightly or letting it slip away entirely. A metal plate had to be placed in her forehead just to hold her skull together. Her jaw had been shattered. Doctors offered her hypnotherapy later in life, a chance, maybe, to unlock memories that could help identify her attacker. And here's where Vanessa's strength as a person truly begins to reveal itself. She said no. Because as much as she wanted answers, she was terrified of what else might come back with them. She made a choice, even as an adult reflecting on the worst night of her life, to protect her own mind from further damage. Think about that. The willingness to sacrifice truth for survival. That's who Vanessa Bennett is. But surviving physically was only the beginning of her battle. Growing up, Vanessa was raised by her paternal grandmother, the very same woman who had discovered the crime scene that morning. Can you imagine the weight that grandmother carried? Raising the sole survivor of her own son's murder. Every single day, a living reminder of everything that had been lost, and everything that had, somehow, against all odds, remained. As a child, Vanessa didn't fully grasp what had happened to her family. But other kids did. And children, as we all know, can be cruel in ways they don't even understand. She was teased, mocked, made to feel different in a world that already felt unstable beneath her feet. She struggled with insomnia. She carried anger she didn't know how to name. By the time she reached the 8th grade, her grandmother, perhaps overwhelmed, perhaps trying to give her a different chance at stability, sent her to live with an aunt. Not long after, she was sent away again, this time to a boarding school. Passed from home to home. Never quite settling. Never quite feeling like she belonged anywhere. If you've ever wondered what happens to a child after the cameras stop rolling, after the news stops reporting, after the world moves on from the tragedy that defined them, this is what happens. By her teenage years, the emotional weight of everything she had endured needed somewhere to go. And too often, in cases just like hers, that pain doesn't just disappear. It transforms. It finds new, more dangerous ways to survive. Vanessa began experimenting. First with marijuana. Then drinking. It felt, in some strange way, manageable. Controlled, even. But then, at 19 years old, everything shifted. She became pregnant. She had a son. And just 3 months after he was born, he was taken from her. Try, for a moment, to sit with that pain. A young woman who had already lost her entire family before she could even form memories of them, now losing her own child, too. A repeating pattern of loss that seemed almost cruelly designed to test how much one person could endure. She didn't know how to be a mother. She'll tell you that herself, honestly, without flinching. She was barely more than a child raising a child, carrying trauma she never had the tools to process. And that's when things started going wrong. She turned to cocaine. Then heroin. The very substances that so many people warn you never to touch, became her escape from a reality that had never once been kind to her. What followed were years that most people could never imagine surviving. She experienced homelessness, living under a bridge with a boyfriend, the two of them walking to a nearby hospital just to have somewhere to wash their hair. Small, human details that somehow make the weight of it all even harder to hear. She found herself in and out of legal trouble. Shoplifting, altercations, domestic conflict, trespassing, struggles with substances that took hold of her life and refused to let go. But here's the question you have to ask yourself as you listen to this. If you had lived through what Vanessa lived through, if your entire family had been taken from you before you could even form memories of their faces, if you'd been shuffled from relative to relative, if you'd lost your own child at 19, would you have made different choices? Let me know in the comments. It's easy to judge from the outside. It's much harder to understand from the inside. And Vanessa, to this day, doesn't run from her own story. She doesn't hide from the mistakes she's made. She owns them, fully and honestly, even the ones that hurt the most to admit out loud. Because underneath all of it, underneath the addiction, the legal trouble, the years of instability, there was still a diagnosis that had never been given to her. Not until much later in life. Borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress, bipolar disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. 4 separate conditions, compounding on top of each other, inside the mind of a woman who had never once received an explanation growing up for why she felt the way she felt. Why her emotions moved so fast. Why calm never seemed to last. As a teenager, in the depths of that unprocessed pain, she began harming herself. A coping mechanism as devastating as it was desperate. A young girl trying to release an unbearable weight the only way she knew how. If you're someone listening to this who has ever felt like your pain had nowhere to go, please know that support exists, and you are not alone in carrying it. Because Vanessa's story isn't over yet. And what happens next? The son she thought she'd lost forever, the family members who chose to stay by her side, and the moment she finally had to face the man who destroyed her life, in a courtroom, decades later, is where this story turns from devastating to unbelievably human. Stay with me because here's something almost nobody talks about when it comes to survivors of tragedy. We want their stories to have a clean redemption arc. We want the little girl who survived the unthinkable to grow up, overcome everything, and become some kind of symbol of triumph. But real life doesn't work that way. And Vanessa Bennett's life is proof of that. Because even in the middle of addiction, even in the middle of homelessness, even while cycling through the legal system, there was one thread that never fully let go of her. Her son. Remember him? The baby she had at 19. The baby taken from her after just 3 months. 4 years, Vanessa carried the weight of that loss silently, never knowing where he was, never knowing who he'd become, never knowing if he even knew she existed. Then, in 2018, the very same year investigators finally identified her family's killer, something else happened in Vanessa's life that would prove almost as significant. She met her son. For the first time, as an adult. Try to imagine that reunion. Decades of wondering. Decades of guilt. Decades of not knowing whether the child she gave life to even wanted to know her. And what she found broke her heart in the best possible way. He was thriving. A straight A student. Someone who had grown up with stability, with support, with everything Vanessa herself had been denied as a child. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. She said it herself, in words so simple yet so devastating in their honesty, that it felt good to see she had created someone in her image who represented good things, because for so long, she had believed she was the opposite. She had believed, deep down, that she was somehow evil. Think about carrying that belief about yourself for years. Believing that the trauma inflicted upon you as a 3-year-old girl had somehow poisoned who you were destined to become. And then finally, having proof, walking, breathing, straight A proof, that it wasn't true. Now, she says, he knows he can call her. Not out of obligation. Out of choice. That's not closure. But it's something. And sometimes, something is everything. But not every relationship in Vanessa's life found that same resolution. She has 2 daughters as well, daughters who are currently being raised by a cousin on her father's side of the family. And here is where her story takes a turn that is, honestly, difficult to sit with. She is not permitted to see them. She doesn't know where they live. Imagine losing your parents and your sister as an infant. Imagine losing your first son for over 2 decades. And now imagine losing access to your own daughters in the present day while you are still very much alive and still very much trying to heal. Loss, for Vanessa, has never been a single event. It has been a lifelong companion, appearing again and again in different forms, at different ages, in different relationships. It's the kind of pattern that would break most people entirely. And yet, she keeps going. She'll tell you herself that she's close to one cousin, someone she describes almost like a big sister, and to one uncle. Small, precious pockets of connection in a life defined far too often by disconnection. Now let's go back to 2018, because that year carried more weight for Vanessa than almost any other year of her life. It was the year she met her son for the first time as an adult. And it was also the year she learned that the man responsible for the murder of her parents and sister finally had a name. How do you even process that? 2 life-altering revelations arriving in the very same year, both connected to loss, both connected to identity, both forcing her to confront who she was and where she came from all at once. When she first heard that Alex Christopher Ewing had been identified, she wasn't overwhelmed with relief. She wasn't overcome with joy. In fact, her own words about that moment are some of the most quietly devastating in her entire story. She said she was shocked. She had assumed, for decades, that they would simply never catch him. That he was either already dead, or already locked away somewhere for an unrelated crime, living out his life in obscurity while her family's case remained unsolved forever. And when she found out he had, in fact, been sitting in prison the entire time, for a different crime, in a different state, while her family's killer walked around unnamed for 34 years. Did she feel relief? Her answer might surprise you. Not really, she said. Because by the time he was finally identified, her life had already been shaped, scarred, and rearranged by everything that came after that night. The identification of a killer, no matter how significant to the justice system, could not undo the years of homelessness. It could not undo the addiction. It could not undo the children she lost access to, or the childhood spent bouncing between relatives, or the diagnoses that came far too late to help her as a teenager. She said, if catching him brought comfort to everyone else, then that was good. That it should happen. But for her personally, the damage was already permanent. That's one of the most brutally honest things a survivor has ever said about the justice system. Because we, as a society, often expect closure to look like a finish line. Like the moment the gavel falls, all the pain resolves, and everyone can finally move forward. But for the people actually living inside that pain, closure doesn't erase anything. It simply confirms what they've always known. Which brings us to the trial itself. By 2021, Vanessa found herself sitting in a courtroom, listening to evidence from a crime scene she has no conscious memory of, evidence connected to a night that shaped every single day of her life that followed. She heard the 911 call. Her grandmother's voice, the very same woman who raised her, the very same woman who discovered the crime scene that morning, sounding panicked, disoriented, unable to even provide her own son's address because the family had only just moved in. Vanessa described her grandmother as someone she had always viewed as a person in complete control. Hearing her sound so shattered, so out of control, on a recording played before a courtroom of strangers, was unsettling in a way she hadn't prepared for. Then came the physical evidence. Photographs. A piece of carpet that had been cut directly from the crime scene, preserved as evidence for nearly 4 decades. She sat through as much of it as she could. But when she knew the photographs of her sister were coming next, she left the room. Some things, even for the strongest survivors, are simply too much to witness. And then came her moment. The victim impact statement. The moment where Vanessa Bennett, the 3-year-old girl who survived the unsurvivable, stood before a courtroom and told them everything she had been through. Everyone in that room was crying, and I'm sure you are right now, because I certainly did when I was researching this case. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was performed for effect, but because it was true. Every single word of it. The homelessness, the addiction, the lost children, the diagnoses, the decades of carrying trauma no one properly explained to her until she was already an adult. A courtroom full of legal professionals, people who hear difficult testimony every single day of their careers, reduced to tears by the raw honesty of one woman's survival. That's the moment this story stops being about a killer standing trial and becomes entirely and completely about her. But her story isn't finished yet. Because what Vanessa Bennett is doing now, with everything she has survived, might be the most powerful part of this entire story. So where is Vanessa Bennett today? She's 42 years old. She lives in Tucson, Arizona. She's married to her second husband. On paper, it sounds simple. Ordinary, even. The kind of life summary you'd read on a census form. But nothing about how she got here was ordinary. And nothing about how she's choosing to move forward is simple. Because here's the truth about survivors like Vanessa. The world tends to want them to disappear quietly once the headlines fade. Once the trial ends. Once the killer is sentenced. Society, in a strange way, expects them to simply heal off camera and stop needing anything further from anyone. But real healing doesn't work on anyone else's timeline. And Vanessa's healing is still very much in progress, every single day. Financially, life remains a genuine struggle. She's on disability due to the lasting physical effects of that night in 1984. The paralysis, the plate in her forehead, the injuries that never fully left her body even decades later. Her husband is disabled as well, but has not been approved for his own disability support. Together, the two of them are living on just $700. Let that number sit with you for a moment. $700. For a woman who lost her entire family in one of the most devastating crimes in Colorado history. For a woman who carries permanent physical injuries from an attack she doesn't even consciously remember. For a woman who has spent decades fighting to simply stay alive. They receive food assistance. Relatives help where they can. And Vanessa, in her own words, describes herself as resourceful. Not defeated. Not hopeless. Resourceful. That word alone tells you everything about who she has chosen to become, despite every single thing life has thrown at her. And here's where her story takes a turn that feels, finally, like something closer to hope. Vanessa wants to write her own life story. Not because someone else is telling her to. Not for money, not for fame, not because a producer suggested it would make good television. She wants to write it because writing, for her, is release. She describes her emotions as something that can shift from 1 to 100 almost instantly, with no in-between she can consciously access or control. But on paper, she says, she can actually feel that in-between. She can slow it down. She can process it in a way her own mind won't normally allow her to do in real time. Think about that for a moment. A woman who has spent her entire life being told what happened to her, by newspapers, by television producers, by strangers piecing together a tragedy from crime scene photos and court transcripts, finally wanting to tell it herself. In her own words. On her own terms. That's not just an act of healing. That's an act of reclaiming her own story. And when asked what she hopes people take away from everything she's lived through, her answer wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even really about Alex Christopher Ewing at all. It was about will. She said that people have asked her, her entire life, how she managed to go on without her parents. How a 3-year-old girl who lost everything could grow into an adult who kept getting back up, over and over again, no matter how many times life knocked her down. Her answer is simple. Almost deceptively simple. Her will to live was so strong that she never gave up. Not through the addiction. Not through the homelessness. Not through losing her son for over 2 decades. Not through losing access to her daughters today. Not through 4 separate mental health diagnoses that went unexplained and untreated for most of her early life. She never gave up. And in any situation, as an adult, she says she simply refuses to. Now think back to where this story began. A 3-year-old girl, waking up in a hospital bed, with a metal plate about to be placed in her forehead, with no memory of the family she had just lost, with an entire lifetime of trauma ahead of her that she hadn't even begun to process yet. If you had told that little girl, in that hospital room in January of 1984, everything she was about to endure over the next 4 decades, the bouncing between relatives, the addiction, the homelessness, the lost children, the 38-year wait for justice, you would have thought it impossible for anyone to survive all of it. And yet, here she is, still standing, still fighting, still resourceful, still writing, still choosing every single day not to give up. That is not a small thing. That is, in every possible sense of the word, extraordinary. But we can't end this story without going back one final time to the man responsible for all of it. Because Alex Christopher Ewing didn't just take 3 lives that night in January of 1984. He took the innocence of a 3-year-old girl who would spend the rest of her life piecing together a childhood that was violently ripped away from her before she could even form a single memory of the people who loved her most. He was finally convicted in August of 2021, 37 years after that night, and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. Because of the sentencing laws in place back in 1984, each of those life sentences carries the possibility of parole after 20 years. Under the rules of the era in which his crimes were committed, he is legally entitled to that consideration. Whether or not that ever comes to pass, is a chapter of this story that has yet to be written. But one thing is already permanently written. Already unchangeable, no matter what happens next in any courtroom, in any parole hearing, in any future decade. He will always be known as the man who destroyed the Bennett family. And Vanessa Bennett will always be known as the little girl who survived him. There's one more part of this story left. The part that ties everything together, the meaning behind survival, the meaning behind will, and why Vanessa's story matters far beyond true crime headlines. Let's talk, for a moment, about what justice actually means. We like to think of it as something clean, something final. A verdict read aloud in a courtroom, a gavel striking wood, a killer led away in handcuffs while the credits roll and the victims finally get to rest. But real justice, the kind that exists outside of television scripts, is messier than that, slower than that. And in Vanessa Bennett's case, it took 38 years to even arrive, and when it finally did, it didn't erase a single day of the pain that came before it. That's the part of this story that should stay with you long after you finish watching. Because Vanessa didn't get to skip from tragedy to triumph. She didn't get a montage. She got decades of struggle first. She got addiction. She got homelessness. She got the heartbreak of losing a child, and then the heartbreak of losing 2 more. She got diagnoses that came far too late to help the teenage girl who needed them most. And only after all of that, did she finally get a name for the man who started it all. So why tell this story? Why does Vanessa's life matter beyond the headlines, beyond the true crime documentaries, beyond the courtroom footage? Because somewhere out there, right now, there is someone carrying trauma no one else can see. Someone whose pain didn't come with a news crew or a court case or a public reckoning. Someone quietly wondering if their own struggles, their own mistakes, their own addiction, their own broken relationships, make them unworthy of understanding, unworthy of love, unworthy of a second chance. Vanessa Bennett's story is proof that surviving doesn't mean healing in a straight line. It doesn't mean never falling down. It doesn't mean always making the right choice every single time under the weight of unimaginable trauma. It means getting back up. Again, and again, and again. It means owning your mistakes without letting them define the whole of who you are. It means finding a reason to keep going, even when that reason is as simple and as powerful as pure will. Today, Vanessa carries physical reminders of that night every single day. The paralysis, the plate in her forehead, the jaw that was shattered before she could even walk properly on her own. Reminders that never fully fade, no matter how many decades pass. But she also carries something else. Something the man who attacked her family could never take, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he stole from her that night. Her voice. The willingness to sit down, all these years later, and tell her story honestly. Not the sanitized version. Not the version that makes her look like a flawless hero who overcame everything with grace. The real version. The one with addiction in it. The one with homelessness in it. The one with lost children and difficult choices and years spent simply trying to survive one day at a time. Because that version, the honest one, is the one that might actually help somebody else who is struggling right now to believe that their own life is still worth fighting for. So today, Vanessa Bennett is 42 years old. She lives in Tucson, Arizona. She's rebuilding her life alongside her husband, one day at a time, on very little, but with more resourcefulness and resolve than most people could summon in a lifetime. She has reconnected with her son, who grew up to become someone she describes with genuine, tearful pride. She hopes, one day, for a different relationship with her daughters. And she is writing. Putting the unbearable weight of her emotions onto paper, finding in that quiet, private act of writing something she has never fully been able to access anywhere else. The space, finally, to feel everything in between. If there's one thing to take from the story of the Bennett family, from that January night in 1984, from the 38 years it took for the truth to surface, from the little girl who grew into the woman telling this story today, let it be this. Will is not the absence of struggle. Will is choosing to keep standing, even when everything in your life has given you every reason to fall. Vanessa Bennett lost her parents. She lost her sister. She lost years of her life to addiction, to homelessness, to a justice system and a childhood that failed her in nearly every way a system can fail a child. And she is still here. Still fighting. Still resourceful. Still refusing, every single day, to give up. If this story moved you the way it moved us to tell it, share it. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear that surviving isn't about being unbroken. It's about getting back up anyway. The case of the Bennett's family leaves behind more than just a resolved file. It leaves a set of hard, real lessons. Let's talk about just two of them. One of the most powerful and often overlooked truths in Vanessa Bennett's story is the difference between surviving something and healing from it. We tend to use these words as if they mean the same thing, as if making it through a tragedy automatically means you've processed it, resolved it, and moved past it. Vanessa's life is living proof that this simply isn't true, and understanding that distinction can change how we view our own struggles and how we view the struggles of the people around us. Vanessa survived the night her family was attacked. Her body, remarkably, kept fighting even as she suffered injuries that would leave permanent physical damage. But surviving that night didn't mean she woke up the next morning equipped with the tools to process what had happened to her. It didn't erase the trauma buried in a body too young to even form memories of it. It didn't prepare her, a 3-year-old girl, for the decades of instability that followed, being raised by a grandmother who herself was grieving an unimaginable loss, being shuffled between an aunt's home and a boarding school, being teased by classmates who couldn't possibly understand what she carried. This is the part of trauma that so many stories skip over. We want the narrative arc to be simple. Tragedy happens, the person is strong, they overcome it, and life moves forward in a clean, upward line. But healing rarely looks like that. For Vanessa, the years following her survival were marked by addiction, homelessness, legal trouble, and the loss of her own child at just 19 years old. None of that erased her strength. If anything, it reveals just how much weight she was carrying without ever having been given the support to carry it properly. This is a lesson that extends far beyond Vanessa's individual story. It applies to anyone who has lived through something difficult, a loss, an illness, an abusive relationship, a traumatic accident, and felt confused or ashamed that they didn't bounce back the way they thought they should. Survival is the first step. It is not the finish line. Healing is a separate, much longer process, one that often includes setbacks, relapses, mistakes, and years of quietly figuring things out without a roadmap. What makes Vanessa's story so important is that she never pretends otherwise. She openly discusses her addiction, her time being homeless, her struggles with the legal system, and the mental health diagnoses that came far too late to help her as a teenager. Borderline personality disorder, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and ADHD. She doesn't frame these as separate from her survival story. She frames them as part of it. They are the direct, understandable consequence of a little girl who endured something catastrophic and was never given the proper support to process it in real time. The lesson here is one of compassion, both for others and for ourselves. If you have lived through something painful and your life afterward hasn't looked like a tidy redemption arc, that doesn't mean you failed to heal correctly. It means you're human, navigating something that doesn't come with instructions. Surviving buys you time. Healing is the work you do with that time, and it is rarely linear, rarely quick, and rarely finished on anyone else's schedule but your own. The second major lesson from Vanessa's story centers on what will to live actually means in practice, because it is almost always misunderstood. People tend to imagine willpower or resilience as something visible and dramatic, a single defining moment where a person chooses courage over despair, and from that point forward, everything falls into place. Vanessa's story dismantles that myth entirely, and in doing so, offers something far more honest and far more useful. When asked how she managed to keep going after losing her parents and sister, after losing her own child at 19, after years of addiction and homelessness, Vanessa didn't describe some singular turning point. She described will as something quieter and far more persistent. She said she never gave up, not as a one-time decision, but as a repeated, daily choice made over and over again, often in the middle of circumstances that would have justified giving up entirely. This is the crucial distinction. Will is not the absence of mistakes. Vanessa made plenty, she says so herself, without excuses and without self-pity. She turned to cocaine and heroin. She found herself in and out of jail. She struggled to be present as a mother before she'd ever had the chance to heal from being a motherless child herself. If will meant never stumbling, never making the wrong choice, never falling into patterns that caused harm to herself or others, then Vanessa's story would disqualify her from being called resilient at all. But that's precisely why her definition of will is so much more valuable than the version we usually see portrayed. Real will isn't about avoiding every fall. It's about what happens after the fall. It's the decision, made again and again, to keep moving forward even without a clear picture of what forward looks like. It's choosing to enter treatment for addiction after years of struggle. It's choosing to meet a son at 43 years old after 2 decades of separation, even not knowing if he'd want a relationship with her. It's choosing, even now, to write down her story, not because it's easy, but because it's the one place she says she can finally process emotions that otherwise move too fast for her to catch. This lesson matters because most people will never face a tragedy as extreme as Vanessa's. But everyone, at some point, faces moments where giving up feels like the only reasonable option. A failed relationship, a lost job, a health crisis, a mistake that feels unforgivable. In those moments, we often wait for some surge of courage or clarity to carry us through. Vanessa's story suggests something different, that will isn't a feeling you wait to arrive. It's a decision you make anyway, even when the feeling isn't there yet. Her resourcefulness, a word she uses to describe herself even while living on very little, isn't about having everything figured out. It's about refusing to stop trying, refusing to let past mistakes become a life sentence of their own, and refusing to let circumstances outside her control define the rest of her story. That is the truest form of will, not the absence of struggle, but the quiet, unglamorous refusal to stop showing up for your own life, no matter how many times it knocks you down. If Vanessa Bennett's story moved you the way it moved us to tell it, do one simple thing before you go: hit that like button. Not for us. For her. For every survivor out there who has ever felt like their pain didn't matter because the world stopped paying attention. Every like tells this platform that stories like hers deserve to be heard, not forgotten in some old case file gathering dust for 38 years. And I want to hear from you. Down in the comments, tell me, what part of Vanessa's story hit you the hardest? Was it the 911 call? The moment she met her son for the first time as an adult? The fact that justice sat behind bars the entire time and nobody knew it? I read every single comment, and I promise you, your voice matters here just as much as the story itself. If you're new here, subscribe. Because we don't just tell true crime stories for shock value. We tell them because behind every headline, there is a real person who lived through it, and they deserve to be remembered as more than a case number. Because if you thought waiting 38 years for justice was almost impossible to comprehend, what if I told you there's another case, just as haunting, just as heartbreaking, sitting less than 60 miles from where the Bennett family once lived? A 12-year-old girl, walking home from a routine evening rehearsal. A short distance. A familiar street. The kind of walk she had made 100 times before without a second thought. She never made it home. No body. No witnesses. No trace of what happened to her for over 30 years. Click the video showing on your screen right now. Because this next story might be even harder to sit through than the last one.